when I started to feel like an imposter is the fact that they could sing. They had incredible dialect skills. Like they could do any accent. They could do Shakespeare like you wouldn't believe. It was just like I felt like I didn't belong. And obviously, eventually, I started to get a little better. And, it really was just about showing up every day, regardless of what I felt. I cried myself to sleep many times. So that sort of fed into my imposter syndrome. But at the same time, it really fueled me to prove them wrong.
You're listening to the Creative Impostor, episode number 44. Welcome to the Creative Impostor. I'm your host, Andrea Klunder, and it has been some weeks since you have received a new episode from me in your podcast feed. And there's a few reasons for that. The most compelling reason is because there is a brand new podcast for you to check out. It's called Power Your Story, and it is produced by a group of high school students that I have been working with in Chicago over the past 6 weeks to tell stories from their perspective about their lives and the things that matter most to them. So please, if you have not already, go to poweryourstorypodcast.com, or you can download it from Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Google Play Music, all the usual places. Give a listen to what my students have to say and how it is that they say it, and let us know what you think. You can follow our Facebook page, comment there, or leave a review in iTunes or wherever it is you listen to your podcasts. And that project leads me to the other reason you haven't heard from me, which is that I got bored. I mean, I've been podcasting since 2015, and I've been doing these incredible interviews with these incredibly gifted, talented, creative individuals, and I've been learning a lot about myself as an artist, as a content creator, and really as a human in the process. And doing this program with the high school students has really shown me that there is more that I want to be doing. Also, working with today's guest, Elsie Escobar, in her E-League podcast mentorship program has doubled down on that feeling and caused me to really dig deep and figure out what it is that I want to be saying, how it is I want to be saying that, and how to utilize my unique gifts, talents, skills, and experiences to accomplish all of that, which really, if you're listening to this show, I think that is something that you have probably at one time or another, or maybe even right now, are wondering about your own self. You know, back when I was doing more theater, before podcasting, before teaching yoga, I was reading a lot of books, and I read one by theater director Peter Brook called The Open Door. And one of my favorite quotes from that book is, quote, "The director's most reliable tool may be his capacity to be bored," end quote. And that is so true, because as the director, or in this case, as the podcast producer, if you're getting bored, then certainly it's time to shift something for your audience, because you are the filter through which your audience is having an experience of your work. And Elsie Escobar is a master at this, of shifting and changing and growing and challenging herself and others to go deeper, to explore what she calls the more in their work. So I want to keep this introduction short and sweet, because the interview with Elsie is so jam-packed, full of really great, deep food for thought and new ideas. You know how the Grinch's heart grew like 3 times bigger in that Dr. Seuss story? Well, your brain is about to grow 3 times bigger. Also, you're going to hear me gush over all of the wonderful things that Elsie has done and how she is one of the first people to ever inspire me to even want to have a podcast in the first place. And so I am more than thrilled to present to you actor, yoga teacher, podcast producer, co-host of She Podcasts, co-host of Libsyn's The Feed, podcast happiness expert at Libsyn, and podcasting advocacy spokesperson, Elsie Escobar. And Elsie Escobar, welcome to the Creative Impostor podcast. Thank you so much for joining me on this call today.
Oh my gosh, I love to be here. Andrea, I'm famous. I made it on the Creative Impostor podcast. What am I gonna
Seriously,
do next?
right? It's your big break.
I know.
It's true. Well, you are famous. You are famous. And the history of how you and I have come together has been a long time in the making. And we have so many parallels. You were one of the first podcasters I ever listened to, probably before I actually understood what a podcast was.
Oh my gosh.
I don't actually know how I found your show, but Elsie's yoga class was one of the very first podcasts I ever listened to. And I was teaching yoga at that time, but I was like, here's this totally different way of teaching yoga that doesn't involve a yoga studio, where you can totally do your own thing. And you can build this following of people that is not specific to a geographic location. Though I will confess, I never actually did any of your yoga classes on that podcast. I used to skip.
That's all right. I forgive you.
I used to skip specifically to the meditations.
Right.
So I would download the meditation episodes, and I still have a few saved on my phone, like so many years later, because there's something about the way that you did the meditations and the sound of your voice that, like, if I have a migraine or a headache or something like that, I can listen to those meditations and it can help de-escalate the pain that I'm experiencing. So you're like a pain remedy in my phone.
Awesome. I'm in the medicine cabinet.
You are. You are. But then since then, what happened was you were no longer producing new episodes. And I was like, what happened to Elsie? Where is Elsie? And then, I don't know, some period of time later, when I finally decided I wanted to start my own show and came up with the Creative Impostor, I was looking for resources online and found She Podcasts. And I was like, it's Elsie.
Oh, she's morphed into something else.
I know. And it's like though the medium was the same, right? Podcasting was the same medium. It is like you morphed into something else. And prior to doing a yoga podcast, you also have been an actor and still do incorporate that into your work. Tell me a little bit about how it is that you've come to transition and reinvent yourself so many times.
You know, it's so weird. Somebody brought that up to me just the other day, and I was like, I don't really ever see that. Like, it's sort of like I just do whatever I decide to do in a way. Like, this is what's important to me right now, or this is what I'm interested in right now, and I want to just do that. And I take it moment by moment, because when I start to think about that, I'm like, yeah, I have done all these different things, but I didn't really seek to sort of reinvent myself. When it became a little bit more obvious to me was when I started to do a little bit more of the online marketing / business type training, or like studying, which I didn't have any of before when I started to do Elsie's yoga class, and my website at that time. And I mean, it's still live. It's just that I've abandoned it. It's elsiesyogaKula.com. And I started initially by just finding the easiest thing ever, which was WordPress at that time. And I kind of just did things just because I could. I learned essentially moment by moment. It was like, oh, I need a website. How do I do that fast? Google. Okay, like this. Oh, I needed to put a picture up online. How do I do that? Google, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like it really was just like that. I just would put that stuff out. So going back to what I was talking about in terms of like actual online training, like marketing stuff and how you do all this fancy things that I didn't know anything about, there's always how do I even put that in words? Because I teach yoga. I was doing the acting thing. So I still at that time was sort of putting myself out there as an actor. And then I started to get into this podcasting thing, and people were coming to me for podcasting stuff that only I at that time knew how to teach. And how in the heck is all that going to line up?
Mm-hmm.
And I got very ungrounded by that. And it sort of made me get really quiet about it because I didn't know how to put it out. I didn't know who I was. And it sort of made me come back to like a real quiet place where I thought that I had to just choose. And then I chose to do the yoga thing. I chose to really put that forward. Like that was going to be my face. And in the process, I realized that I was letting go of a lot of who I was as well. And it took me I think it took me, let me see, when was that? That was like literally 2010 when that first began, the process of me trying to demystify everything I am. And then I didn't become clear till sometime between 2015 and 2016 of how to own all the bits and pieces.
Mm-hmm.
It took a long time. And I know that we talked about this, you and I did, for you, because I totally get you. I mean, it's so hard to bring what seems to be so sort of paradoxical in a way and bring it together in a cohesive way. Where I was thinking is I was judging people reading it and saying, oh, no, they're not going to get it.
Yeah. And so when people started reaching out to you for advice in the podcasting space, did you feel like a podcasting expert at that time? Was that something that you sought out to teach other people how to podcast, or was that something that just kind of evolved on its own?
I think it evolved on its own. I used to help a lot of the obviously the yoga teacher people, right? I did my first, what I called my first yogic workshop when I was still in LA. I had been podcasting for all of 6 months or maybe a little bit more, and I thought this is so cool. I want to teach people how to do this. And I did like a live yogic workshop. And what I did is I was given a space at somebody's house. And I did it in the way that I used to know that yoga teachers were used to attending yoga workshops. And as you know, a lot of the yoga workshops are day workshops that you go on the weekend and you'll do like either Friday night or Saturday or Sunday or the entire thing. And they're usually broken down. Like you go in the morning session and then there's a break and then there's the afternoon session. And I did that. And I kind of thought like, this would be great because yoga teachers are used to this. And what I did is I brought all of my podcasting books, because that's how I learned, through books. And I brought all of my gear, like my microphone, my computer, a stand, all the different things that I used to create Elsie's yoga class. And when people showed up, I had snacks and everything. It was somebody's house. And then what I did is like I taught about everything at the beginning. And then we had the lunch and stuff. And afterwards was all practicum. So it was all, okay, guys, you guys are going to create your blog. I mean, it was literally from the ground up. You get an account here. You get your blog here. This is what you call it. We're going to record this. I mean, it was insane. I don't even know how, but it worked out really well. I mean, because I didn't know what I didn't know. And I only taught from my own experience and I kept it super basic. But yeah, that was like the first time that I started teaching. I started teaching podcasting almost immediately after I figured out how the heck to do it.
And why podcasting? Like, where do you think this passion that you have? Because you're not just somebody who podcasts as like one of the many marketing, media outreach type things that you do. You're somebody who like lives, breathes, eats, drinks, sweats podcasting, as far as I know.
Yes, I totally do. I am sweating right now as we speak. But
what do you think it is specifically about this medium? And I'm asking this because I was just having conversations yesterday. Another thing that my listeners know and that you know is that I've just completed a 6-week program teaching high school students in the Chicago Public Schools how to make a podcast. And we just released it online this week. And the school had kind of like a summer festival outside in the parking lot where they were showing off our podcast. And then there were 2 other programs that were running simultaneously. So they were kind of showing off all the summer programs and inviting the parents and family and community and stuff like that. And a lot of the adults there have not a clue what a podcast is. Like they've never heard of it. It's not something that's part of their world. And, so here I am. I'm like, oh, our students are handing out stickers with our podcast URL on them and saying, here's our website, listen to our podcast. And the adults are like, oh, that's really nice. And they have no idea what the students have made. And we had iPads set up with headphones where we had our website with all the different episodes that they could listen to. And so we would guide them over and say, hey, listen to what we made and kind of show them what it was. And they'd be like, oh, I get what this is now. Like I never knew what it was. But a few people were like, wait, where's the video? And we were like, what do you mean, where's the video? There's no video. It's just audio. They're like, what? You just listened to it?
You're like, yeah.
And they're like, well, why wouldn't you make video? Wouldn't it be better if it had video? And so here I was having this conversation of like educating what a podcast was and simultaneously trying to say why there's not video. So that's the long way of asking this question of like, what is it specifically about podcasting that you are so passionate about?
Yeah, I think it was multifaceted. And I think part of it was around the recognition really quickly that it was, for me, a self-help tool. It was a way in which I experienced a very deep transformation in who I was as a woman or as a person. And then that I can split up into two different perspectives. One of it was the fact that I fell in love with the medium as a listener first. So I didn't immediately go, oh, I want to do this. I felt a deep connection to the relationships that I had with the people that I was listening to. And at that time in my life, I had created a sense of isolation for myself so that I had created a lack of social connections that kept me grounded in reality, really. And it was sort of like I had put myself in a position where it was very like, this is the world and there's nothing above and beyond what my experience of the world was at that time. And when I started to listen to podcasts, I began to see that there were other people that were living lives in different ways. And as simple as that sounds, without even focusing in on anything specific, that in itself opened up so many ideas in my own head. And it gave me hope that there was something more. And people might think that, because your podcast, after listening to a lot of some of your episodes, you really go deep into, I can't say heavy. Well, yeah, maybe heavy. I mean, you do share a lot of yourself and it's very impactful, and the content itself is transformative. I mean, you're addressing some pretty deep things, right? At the time that I was listening to podcasts, I wasn't really listening to very deep things. I was listening to classes, like I had an anatomy class that I really loved, and I started to listen to a lot of tech podcasts. And of course, very meta already from the get-go, I started to listen to a podcast called Podcast 411, which was about podcasting. And it was an interview show where my now co-host, Rob Walsh, was interviewing podcasters. And it was different types of podcasters. And they would just tell them, this is the gear we use. This is what the podcast is about. And why did you start? Like real simple stuff like that. And I started to realize that these people are amazing. I mean, amazing. And just like at that time, there was a trucker guy who used to podcast on the road. And, then there's the podcasting priest who was like doing all this incredible stuff, a priest from the Netherlands. And then, I mean, seriously, it was unending. People who were super different, lived in all over the world and were creating this content. And I started listening to their podcasts as well. And I saw that there was so much more to the world. And I realized, wow, this is crazy. And in listening, these voices, and what I say is that these voices in my head saved my life. And that's how I quantify it. So they gave me hope. And then I began to have a podcast. I was helped by a podcaster who inspired me. He basically said, you should have a podcast. And I was like, I don't even know how to do that. And he's like, if you have any questions, I will help you. And he totally did. And I did Elsie's yoga class, right? And so in the process of creating the podcast, it also was very empowering because I learned tech. I learned how to do all of these different things with my computer, like audio editing and things like what, I mean, that's like just something I did not put in my set of skill set that I was going to learn is like, oh, I will learn audio editing now. Like, but that's not something that happens. And then it also taught me to become a better teacher because I had to be very clear behind the microphone. I had to be very focused on what I was saying. It taught me to pay more attention to the classes themselves, and I had to listen to myself as well. So I became very adept at learning to not criticize my voice but yet still make choices to make myself better, a better teacher, so that I could go, well, that didn't really work out very well. I should have probably paused a little longer, or that was not the right word to say. That didn't come across very clearly, and so I was able to then sort of not censor myself, but refine my skill set.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing that, I was able to become like a professional or an expert in these things.
Mm-hmm.
But I never set out to do that. So that in itself is why I'm so passionate about it, because I don't see it from the perspective of the marketing end of things, or like you become an expert and you can have this new wing of getting your, voice out and people can hire you. Like, I didn't see it that way. And the reason that I love it so much is because the impact that it had in my life, in my actual life, not in my business, which it did anyway, but in my ability to become a better human was so huge that I was like, everybody needs to get behind the mic. I mean, seriously, like as an exercise, like not as in like you have to do a podcast, but get behind the mic and talk.
Mm-hmm.
It'll do things. It'll do stuff to you. And that to me is the transformation of podcasting.
I totally agree with you on that. And that's what I have been trying to communicate with the adults curious about or asking about this program that I'm doing with the high school students, because I've with the same group of students, or a group of students from this same school. And these are students who have diverse learning challenges. And so they have different diagnoses, from anything from severe learning disabilities to speech impediments to autism to cerebral palsy, like all these different diagnoses that in large part give them communication challenges beyond like, oh, I have a fear of, I have stage fright or something like that, or a fear of public speaking. This is like a lot of times they actually have difficulty putting their thoughts and feelings and ideas into words and then physically saying those words. And I've worked with them with video through a different program, and some of the students do very well with video and they like it and they like being, they like the attention, they like having the camera on them. And some of them are petrified. It makes whatever their initial challenge is worse. Like it really brings up like a lot of fear. And I get that, because having been an actor too, like I could be on stage, but put me in front of a video camera and I don't know what it is, but
it's a whole different demon. Yeah. Ooh.
But give these kids a microphone when there's no camera on them, and then put them in the corner or put them in a room where no one is around them and they can just record whatever is on their mind. And suddenly, like, these whole worlds open up and they are able to express themselves in ways that in a face-to-face conversation, they can't express themselves. Or, they can't do it on a video camera because the video camera is intimidating. But there's something about the microphone that is empowering for them.
Yeah. And I think that we remove ourselves a lot from the power of voice, the actual physical manifestation of the words coming out of your mouth. And there is a level of safety when you have the filter of the microphone, because you are actively thinking about it and it's being captured, right? Mm-hmm. So there is that end of things, which in a way sometimes facilitates conversation with people that have a harder time expressing themselves in conversation with somebody else, because there is a level of removal of I am, right? Mm-hmm. There is like, I am doing this thing. But in doing that, it empowers you to do it in real life. It gives you the tools to do it. And, you bring up something that's really important. And I think that it's been on my mind a lot more. And I think that in the process of working with a lot of women podcasters who are seeing this medium in a more impactful way, as something a lot more, right? That it is more. What's become clear is that it really serves as an opportunity to bring us back into an even playing field, because it removes our societal prejudices in some way, in the way that we look. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is very powerful, especially for younger people, because we are such a visual culture right now. Mm-hmm. So many things are visual, so many, right? That's like the videos are in this way, the clothing is this way, the makeup, the hair, like the way that even selfies and the filters, like all of that is so visual. I don't understand I mean, well, this actually becomes like such a lovely tool for people to be able to just go into who they are and be only, and not even judged, but essentially be seen by their voices, which is kind of crazy, right?
No, it's true. It's like what you talked about of like this level of intimacy that is almost immediate when you start listening to someone on a podcast and you're hearing their voice and it's in your ears. It's like this voice in your head, as you said.
Yeah.
And sometimes you feel like you can be listening to someone on a podcast and you've never met this person, but you suddenly feel like you really know them and you have this relationship that you're developing with them just by simply listening and being in their story and feeling that connected to them.
You know, what's really interesting is that some of the first podcasts that I started to listen to were all men. And at that time, even when I think one of the reasons that I was seen so quickly within the industry is that there weren't that many women doing this, right? So I was like one of them. Like, oh, look, there she is. It literally was like that at that time. And I didn't realize that it was an in and that's that. But listening to these guys, primarily they were all storytellers and they're all the LA podcasters were all storyteller podcasts. So nowadays, the majority of podcasts that we tend to bump into, if you kind of want to go into, the Facebook groups and right now, I would say the majority of them are interview based, right? So there's like you talking to somebody else and you have these stories depending on your niche and that's what you do. But the LA podcasters, fittingly so, because it is the entertainment capital of the world, they were all storytellers and they were all basically solo shows of just them telling stories of their lives. And they were drastically different. And I fell in love with that because I got an opportunity to really go deep into their psyche and how they were putting things out. And that is what inspired me initially to create a podcast, because that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do storytelling, sort of journal-like. I get behind the microphone and I just let go. That's what I initially wanted to do. But I was a little bit afraid, so I just went with something safe, which was teaching classes because I was just doing that. But the reason that it was so impactful is because it gave me time to get to know them so deeply. And I would never have been able to get to know the depth of them as men because, without those podcasts. If I would have just met them at a meetup or something without listening to their podcasts, I would not have recognized how multi-level they really were. It would have stopped. The conversation would not have gone to the places that they chose to take it in their shows. So I don't know, there's something very wonderful about that because it does create a level of connection with other people.
Have you ever, in any of your identity transitions, even though you didn't necessarily perceive them as such, or your career transitions, have you ever dealt with imposter syndrome? Has that ever come up for you?
I think it comes in particularly when I was on stage. I think that was the scariest part. I went to a sort of a very prestigious grad program. I did everything on a whim. So I didn't really plan on being accepted. Let's put it that way. I applied to this program because I thought it was neat. And I thought it would push me. I really, seriously, I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. I'm never going to get in. But you know what? I'm going to try it anyway. And the auditions were in San Francisco and my best friend was in San Francisco at that time. And I was like, I'm just going to go to San Francisco and hang out with my best friend and do this thing. All of a sudden I got a call back and I had to fly to Denver, Colorado. And we had a callback weekend. And you seriously had to just be present with 24 people who were called back nationally. And you had to perform and you had to do all this stuff. And I was like, what? But see, here's what happened. I was in a show at that time. I was doing the Cherry Orchard. I was performing in the Cherry Orchard and I couldn't attend. And so I basically said, hey guys, I'm in a show and I can't leave. And they said, just come whenever you can. So what ended up happening is I think I missed an entire day. And then when I flew in, I literally flew into Denver. And as soon as I arrived, I had to go on stage and I had to do my monologue in front of strangers that I've never seen straight off the plane and just do it, and I was like, holy crap. Well, there's nothing at that time, nothing to be done, you just kind of do it. But I actually missed out on feeling like an imposter because I didn't really even have time. But I'm getting to the imposter syndrome here in a second. I never felt it because it was so I was just thrown in. It was sort of like, okay, I'll just do this. And then what happened is I was in my hotel room getting ready to leave, and they called me when I was still in Denver to tell me that I was accepted.
Wow.
So I never even had essentially a chance to feel like I was an imposter because they just let me in. Later on, finding out there's 3 women and 5 men accepted every year. I was one of the 3 women. The other 2 women in there were amazing. When I started to feel like an imposter is the fact that they could sing. They had incredible dialect skills. Like they could do any accent. They could do Shakespeare like you wouldn't believe. It was just like I felt like I didn't belong. Here I am. I barely had any training. This was a fluke. I had never sang on stage before. They could read music, and I was like, I don't even know what that is. We had to go to class, and they would start to sing, and they would go like, oh, what's your, I don't even know what you call it. Like, how
your
do you
range.
sing? What's your range? Yeah. I'm like, I don't know. I had no idea. I mean, there were so many times that I felt completely like all the time. I felt like I didn't belong. I felt like they had to always help me. I felt like the child that wasn't supposed to be there because they had to coach me on my dialect all the time. And I didn't know how to speak very well. And, no, it's not marriage, it's marriage. And I was like, I can't hear the difference. I mean, I would cry over going to that because I was like, I can't hear the difference. I don't know how to make it come out of my mouth. Obviously, eventually, I started to get a little better. And, it really was just about showing up every day, regardless of what I felt. I cried myself to sleep many times. I did my best to pick roles that I felt that I could live into. And they kept challenging me. And there was, times where I was given roles that I felt like they were unfair because I could play that role, but I knew that they didn't feel like I could. And that pissed me off. So that sort of fed into my imposter syndrome. But at the same time, it really fueled me to prove them wrong.
I feel like in a weird way that's related to the topic that I want to make sure we get to next, which is this idea of podcast advocacy. And this is something that you and I talked about when I was coaching with you through the E-League, and also something that you've been talking a lot about on She Podcasts and the Libsyn podcast, the feed, and something that you're going to be facilitating a panel about at the upcoming podcast movement this month in Anaheim, which I'm so excited for.
Oh my God. Okay.
And I think that it relates, even though it's going back to theater, and now we're, jumping back over to podcasting. And what you're doing right now in your work is that you've sort of taken a divergent path from what a lot of people who are teaching podcasting and promoting podcasting, are focused on the marketing and the brand building and using podcasting to build a following and build an audience and get your voice out there and get recognized. And there is nothing wrong with that. And, that's definitely a piece of it. But you've kind of taken a different approach, which is this idea of how can we make podcasting more diverse, which I don't like saying that because sometimes I get a little bit edgy when people start talking about, oh, we need more diversity, because sometimes I feel like that's just like a demographics and data thing. But there's something about, if you look at the statistics of who listens to podcasts, who consumes them, how do they consume them, and also who's making podcasts, like it's a little bit one-dimensional in a way. And there's so much more potential for what podcasting could be and for whom and for how many people. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what it is that you're working on and how you're exploring this idea right now.
When you put it that way, it's bringing the threads. It's really interesting, bringing the threads to my experience as my grad school experience. Mind you, it was the best experience of my life. Like given all of that stuff, because it pushed my boundaries in so many different ways. And now bringing back and really clarifying it really was all about voice. It was all about voice. It was all about the fact that I was put in positions that where I was incredibly uncomfortable with, and I had to break patterns. And I feel that the space of podcasting, especially when you're dealing with the voice and putting yourself out there and being able to listen to the different ways that your words sound and getting challenged in being able to articulate what you feel in a way that lands, right? Because like in acting school, you were at least at some point directed to not cry because the whole drama is in the fight against the emotion, right? It's not in the letting go into the fear and the crying, but it's in really watching the character not cry. That is the most, impactful. And so it feels like in podcasting, we have gotten to a place where there's no drama, It's essentially just like we're only casting light to one side. We're not casting light to the other parts of it. And when we're talking about diversity and diversifying, I challenge us to think about diversifying in the sense of maybe instead of demographics, thinking more psychographic, so that you don't have to label a person as a person of color or as a person of a lower socioeconomic status, but somebody who, instead of going to a yoga class because they have this extra money at the end of the day, that they barely get home to change clothes because they have to have another job that they got to go to at that time. That is a different type of person. And yeah, sometimes that person might fall under a specific type of ethnicity maybe, or socioeconomic status, right? It might happen that way. But it's in the behavior that I'm really most interested in. It's in the behavior of, is that person really going to now go out of their way to listen to something that is, talking? I think if they're going to listen, they're going to listen to the music. I'm not sure that they're going to go into content. And also, when you're that tired in your head, do you really want to think? Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you kind of just want to watch, something random on TV, reality TV. It's brainless. So my challenge around podcasting is that we can reach and start to actually vibrate at a different level, to take that conversation, that dialogue to a different place, to be able to offer places and things, and now going to demographics, the older populations, the younger populations, the teenagers, another option for self-development that is not based on a visual medium, that is not based on the TV talking to us, on these stories that are being developed that are primarily based on the way that somebody looks. It's front and center. And our people are not articulate in being able to talk with each other. We have a hard time having conversations. And how can we help that? How can we facilitate that? And I think the access right now is almost like you were talking about. The advocacy that you did, that type of work that you did, not very many people are willing to do that. They just want to sort of create the thing and put it out there. But you were actually having to talk to other humans to be able to do this. You know how hard that is?
Here
it's
are
hard.
your headphones. Put them on.
Yes.
Here's the website. This is the button that you press. And it's also interesting to me, like, as you're saying that, and this is part of a huge conversation, and that's why you need to have this panel at Podcast Movement to discuss this, is like, recognizing that the students in my program, launching a podcast and putting it on iTunes and Google Play Music and Stitcher, which are kind of like the three that we hear about a lot, is like so exciting to me. And I'm like, yay, our podcast was accepted by iTunes. And they're like, oh, that's cool. Are we on YouTube? Oh. I was like, oh, yeah. Like I knew that we were going to create social media for the show, and I decided we were going to do a Facebook page and we were going to do an Instagram, because the adults like to see the pictures of the kids making the podcast, right? It makes them feel all warm and fuzzy and get interested in it. And, it's really interesting to see, again, that visual. But then here are my students, and they actually could care less about Facebook and Instagram, to be honest. But the one place that they were actually interested of, like, will my show that I made be on YouTube? And I was like, oh, yeah, well, and that just gave me this like aha moment of like, oh, if you want to reach new groups of people, you have to go to where they are. And if these students are spending their time on YouTube, and I want them to like discover podcasts and listen to this show and have access to it, then I need to go to YouTube,
Yep. And I think that that's part of what this conversation is, this dialogue that I wanted to have a podcast movement. The title, it's called The Culture of Podcasting, Exploring the Impact of Podcasts in Society and Culture. And part of what we're going to be talking about is all based on the more. right? To take the conversation away from monetization models, metrics, because that's really front and center. It's what the majority of people talk about, and I'm sure maybe some of your audience is interested in the podcasting industry, but I have a feeling a lot of your audience is more interested in the kind of work that they want to do, which is why they listen to you, because they're empowered to do that. But what's really frustrating about reading podcasting industry articles out there, regardless of who they're aimed for, which is the craziest part, I guarantee you the first sentence is going to in some way say, because podcasting is having a resurgence. And then data point number 1, data point number 2, data point number 3. And usually it has to do with the amount of people that are listening, what certain type of demographics are, and how many people are, like, in terms of like the ad revenue or some kind of metric that has to do with download numbers, statistics, right? But nobody is talking about the impact that these audio programs are having on society and what can happen. And it's interesting because it seems like everybody's talking in a little silo, like everybody's kind of talking to each other about the same stuff of how to make it better, but nobody's looking in the fringes. And I'm not actually, I shouldn't even have said that because it's not true. Nobody's just looking the other way, like just another way, like not even the fringes, just another way to be able to access this stuff. I keep using the library as an example because I feel it's possibly one of the biggest things that could have an influence, on so many people. And I know that there's not as many people using libraries as there used to be. I mean, there really is a big transitional reckoning, I guess, for librarians and what the libraries mean for us now. And they really are morphing into places to go. Yes, you can take books out. And of course, the books are huge, right? But they are really aiming towards programming and safe places and offering computers or access to things that maybe people don't have, that, warm places to be. I mean, there's so many different levels. So the type of person that's going to go into a library for whatever it is that they step in there for, they are probably not the person that has the iPhone in their pocket and, have cable and Netflix and Hulu at home. And you know what I mean? It's just so much stuff. They're going to be a little different. They're going into the library because they want to use the free Wi-Fi. Yeah. So why not have access to listening stations? How simple is that? To be able to set that up for somebody. To be able to have a consumption where it's like quiet in their ears. It's not going to be something visual, which is, as we know, at least for children, I know from my children, the visual component is so, oh my God, it's huge. It's like they just want to look at the screens and play video games. Yeah. But what about introducing, the fact that there's something else they can do? They don't have to look. They can listen. That's a skill. And I remember back in the day, and I haven't been in 5th grade in many, many years. And, I came into this country as a little immigrant who kind of had a slight understanding of English, enough to get me by, enough to understand. And so when I first moved to this country, there were many hours of the day where the teacher didn't know what to do with me. And she would sit me down in the corner and I would listen to stories. I would listen to fairy tales that were at that time in those big old 8-tracks, And so that's what I would listen to at that time. And it was kind of wonderful because it did give me an alone time. It also gave me the opportunity for me to listen. And there were 2 different types. There were some stories that were in Spanish and there were some stories that were in English. And so I had the opportunity to listen to my own language in my own ears and feel comfortable. And it also gave me the opportunity to kind of allow my skills in listening to hear a new language that I now was surrounded with. And how amazing that was, right? But there's so many different levels of how podcasting can impact not only like the library system, but the university system, especially when it comes to studying or getting to know specific types of impact that's happening in society. And that's when also listening to different voices is very important to understand the difference of the news being presented to you. Like politics is such a big thing that's happening right now, right? And in podcasts, I find the ability to feel more empowered about politics versus all the propaganda, really, from either side that you see in mainstream media. But when I listen to podcasts that are addressing newsworthy items. They offer more. They offer different perspectives, and they offer different voices that are often not in any way highlighted. So I feel I'm getting a well-rounded understanding of what really is happening, or in fact, how to frame it for myself so that I feel like I have a position that I can feel is more grounded in humanity versus propaganda, which is what you do with media nowadays,
And I think that goes back to what you had said about the one experience that you can distinctly remember of imposter syndrome, of feeling like you did not belong. I think there's a real opportunity here for the work that you are challenging us to think about and consider in terms of how can we use this incredible medium that has so much potential and so much power and so much impact, rather than creating these individual silos where we're all the same people talking to each other over and over again, and we're creating that, what do they call that, an echo chamber or something like that?
Absolutely, yeah.
Rather than doing that, how can we look beyond that and create a greater sense of belonging that expands into a much bigger space? I don't know what the right word is for it. The opposite of echo chamber.
A much larger conversation. It's an evolved conversation. That's what we're doing. We are choosing to say something else. And when you asked me to kind of clarify in terms of some things that I would love to kind of speak into, and one of the panelists on my panel, that sounds so very articulate. His name is Ernesto Aguilar, and he has been covering public media and community radio and that kind of stuff, like in a variety of different outlets. He really has been writing about public policy, race and diversity and culture for a while, which is kind of what called me to him. He wrote an article about podcasting from the Brown perspective, and it really resonated with me. And he brought forth a very key point where he said, like, how are we offering content that has an impact and begins a larger process of building a greater understanding of our world, not just replicating existing media and cultural dynamics. And the example that he used was the way that currently all the true crime podcasts out there are really, really popular. I mean, they're huge. That's a genre that is growing like crazy. And what's interesting about that was that in the podcasting space, it seems like even then, these people who are putting these true crime stories out are all the same stories. They're all essentially focusing on violent crime, primarily around women, because that's somehow titillating in the way that it's piquing our interest, but it's still keeping the same conversation that we see on Dateline, right?
Mm-hmm.
On regular TV, those kinds of shows. It's still sensationalistic. Why are we not concentrating on the stories that are perhaps dealing with the underrepresented communities, the subtle crimes that are happening in the world, the crimes that are happening with child services, or maybe something that has to do with, especially now with immigration and things that are happening in those places, bringing out that same type of story. Mm-hmm. What about having a podcast that is true crime of other types of crimes that are not like crimes against women? Yeah. It's the same narrative. Why are we doing that? Why can't we shift the narrative? Why can't we elevate it in some way? Why can't we cast light somewhere else?
So, Elsie, a lot of my audience are content creators of some kind and or service providers of some kind, whether that be through podcasts or through blogs or through Facebook Live videos or communities or public speaking or whatever it is. So in terms of this idea of, not just podcasting, but in general with content creation, what advice would you have for somebody who's saying, yes, this totally makes sense to me, and I want to be a part of this larger conversation about how we can create content that is more expansive and more inclusive and allows more people to feel that sense of belonging, where we're not just rehashing the same narrative in our society and culture, but we're actually shifting that narrative and contributing to it and expanding it. What advice would you have, and how would they start?
That's a great question. You know what? The first thing that came into mind here is that you have got to get adept, curious, and be an expert on yourself, first and foremost. Because the biggest issues that I see right now with us as humans is that we are influenced by far by the external so much more than who we are ourselves, which is what the imposter syndrome really focuses in on. It's our ability to follow that instinct that is really key to starting different conversations, because they're unusual, they feel different, and they're often the ones that come from the things that you love. And that's why I love to bring this up, because usually these stories, the different narratives, come when you are either in the process yourself of consuming media, or that you are involved in something physically that you really love to do. So an example would be, I really love The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, like the books. The lead character in that book, I deeply resonated with. And I was like, oh, there was so much about me diving into her headspace while listening, because I listened to the books. They're fantastic. I love the narrator. But when I got really into it, I was like, wow, I felt really empowered by listening to that. And it gave me ideas. It made me think outside of the box. It made me feel more comfortable with myself and my quirkiness. Sherlock, the PBS version of Sherlock, always makes me think. They do such crazy, weird stuff. And the ways that the scenes are cut, and the acting and the relationships, and they always make me so excited to see innovation in this way. And the characters ground me in it. And I get very excited when I watch that, because they're inspiring. Those are things that make me want to have different types of conversation. They're very inspiring to me. You have to really attune to that and follow what that is. Be curious, like, okay, what's the difference between The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and this Sherlock thing? What is it about it that really resonates with me? What is the story I want to tell in that? It's a very subtle space. It's a very subtle place for you to start with, because we tend to like to be told, hey, you should read this book. Hey, you should listen to this story. Hey, you should watch this movie. It's really amazing. And then sometimes you watch it and you're like, well, that wasn't really that amazing. You know what I mean? But you kind of have to go with it because everybody else is talking about it.
Yeah.
I challenge you to go to the things that you really resonate with, because that's the conversation that we need to have. And then you frame it on your point of view, because that's going to start to break patterns. Whenever people work with me, I really love to not give specific answers, even though I'm dying, because sometimes I'm like, this is what you need to do. That's all I want to do sometimes. I go, you do this, do this, and this, just follow these steps. But I also know that you can't follow the steps until you resonate with those steps and what those are. And unless you know how to discover them, you're not going to stick with them. You're not going to do it. And so that's why I'm not giving you a solution. It's sort of like, you gotta go to that place. And also the stories are not going to feel comfortable to tell. And I know you, Miss Andrea, have gone through the process of starting to tell stories that are uncomfortable to tell. And that's where you got to kind of stick. Then they're going to become easier. Then it's going to be like, okay, I can do this. But the level of your work has also stepped forward to the point where you're choosing a little more. You're saying, okay, this is cool, but I kind of want to talk about this. And I want you to care less about whether or not they, in quotes, your listeners are interested in it, because they will resonate regardless, because it matters to you. That's it.
Elsie, I'm not paying you for this interview. You can't coach me on it. I love it. And I appreciate it. And that's a perfect answer, and not what I anticipated that you would say, but in retrospect, it's exactly what I would expect you to say. So that's wonderful. Is there anything else before we end this conversation? Is there anything else that you want to share with us right now at this time?
No, I think that this has been lovely. Lovely.
What's going through your mind right now? Are you feeling inspired, motivated, a little bit overwhelmed? Take some time. Let it soak in. How can you be a part of shifting this cultural narrative? And is that even something that you want to do? As Elsie said, a lot of this work does not begin from an external activist place. Where it does begin is internally with seeing what you're responding to, what is exciting you, what is lighting you up, what is catching your attention and giving you energy, or what is making you angry? What do you feel like ranting about? What's your pet soapbox right now? And what kind of content are you being drawn toward and why? And this is where the real advocacy begins. Of course, all of the links to Elsie's content and Elsie's work can be found in the show notes at thecreativeimpostor.com/044, including some of my favorite episodes from Elsie's yoga class, the meditation ones that help me with migraines. Yeah, I'm going to put those in there too. And meditation and visualization are fantastic ways to get in touch with that essential thing that is within you, that thing that keeps you from getting bored, or that thing that you turn towards and move into when you feel yourself getting bored. And I'm offering one to you as well. This is a technique called Yoga Nidra. No, you do not need to be able to bend yourself into a fancy pretzel pose. All you need to be able to do is put on your headphones, press play, and listen, which I know you can do because that is what you're doing right now. You can get this creative visualization at thecreativeimpostor.com/magic. Also, a couple of resources I want to let you know about. Number one, thank you to the Who's Your Mama podcast with Corinne Mockler. Corinne, I hope I'm saying your name right. But I happened to do a Google search on my name and my show. And it turns out that Corinne, who I've never met, included The Creative Impostor in a list of some of her favorite podcasts. So I wanted to say, if you're listening, thank you. That's incredible. I think that's the first time this show has been featured on a list like that. So the Who's Your Mama podcast is a bi-weekly podcast dedicated to creative mamas. Each episode features chats with inspiring women who are balancing motherhood while still pursuing the things they love, both personally and professionally. So, if that sounds like you, check her show out. Also, even though I was not recording my own episodes, I was featured by the amazing Kelly Covert in her show, In Her Voice. And this is another really great, deep, introspective show that I think you might really love. We talk about how we are innately creative and yet sometimes feel disconnected from it, and how to navigate our relationship with taking risk. You can find that episode linked in the show notes for this episode. And finally, another wonderful friend and colleague and member of my local community, the Chicago Women's Creative Collective, Elizabeth Tuckwell, has a brand new website aimed entirely at helping you ground and shift your energy, become comfortable standing in your own power, and connecting with your unique vision for your life through art and meditation. I love Elizabeth's new site, and right now you can get Elizabeth's Creative Jumpstart when you go to thecreativeimpostor.com/art with intention. Oh my God, I could go on and on and on about all of the amazing resources that Elsie and Corinne and Kelly and Elizabeth and I have for you. But really, if you just head over to thecreativeimpostor.com/044, you'll find all of it there. This episode was mixed by Edwin Ruiz of Mondo Machine, and our theme music is by Jovia Armstrong. I thank you so much for listening. I thank you so much for being willing to take this deep dive with me and look inside and see what else is possible, what else we can do to make this conversation bigger, more expansive, more inclusive, and create a greater sense of belonging in the world. And as I head off to Anaheim, California for Podcast Movement to connect with incredible podcasters like Elsie, I wish you a week full of opportunities for the self-inquiry that it takes to successfully break patterns and shift the narrative in the way that makes the most sense to you.